Monday morning, Michael arrived 10 minutes early, like always. The parking lot was still half empty. A thin layer of fog clung to the edge of the building. Michael sat in his car longer than he needed to, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring at the glass entrance. 3 weeks ago, he had convinced himself losing the promotion would eventually stop bothering him. 3 weeks later, it bothered him more. The feeling that he'd been left behind, because every morning he walked into a reminder. Daniel. Michael grabbed his bag, got out, and headed inside. The office was already up, phones ringing, coffee brewing, people settling into another week. Halfway to his desk, he saw Daniel standing near the manager's office talking, not waiting or asking, talking. The manager listened, actually listened, and thanked him. Daniel smiled, said something else. The manager chuckled. A few seconds later, they walked away together, still talking. Michael kept moving, but the image stayed. 3 months ago, Daniel would have brought those conversations to him. Now Daniel was having them without him. Michael dropped into his chair, opened his laptop, tried to focus. That didn't work. His eyes kept drifting. He thought to himself, Daniel isn't doing anything wrong. Why does this almost make it worse? He wasn't showing off, wasn't trying to impress anyone. Not one shortcut taken. So what is it? He was simply doing the thing Michael should have been doing. And every day that passed, the gap got a little bigger. Around 11:30, another meeting invitation landed in everyone's inbox. Michael just stared at the screen. 30 minutes later, he found himself sitting at the same conference table, in the same chairs as the projector hum filled the room. Only this time the conversation was different. A client issue, and a growing one. The deadline was slipping, costs rising faster than a rocket. Leadership wanted answers now. Ideas started bouncing around the room. One suggestion here, then another. None of them solved the actual problem. Michael felt that usual feeling almost instantly. The answer was right there. It wasn't perfect and likely incomplete, but enough. He started piecing it together, one connection leading to another. The solution was forming without effort. Across the table, Daniel was thinking too. The manager looked around. Anybody? Michael felt that pulse quicken. The answer sat there, right in front of him. Say it. His mouth opened. Maybe. The room turned. Michael felt 20 eyes land on him, really locked on him for real this time. Maybe part of the issue is how we're tracking the vendor changes. He stopped. Because the second the attention arrived, the certainty disappeared. His thoughts scattered. The rest of the answer was still there. He could feel it now, but fear got there first. What do you mean? The manager asked. Michael hesitated. A second passed. I don't know. The words tasted wrong the second they left his mouth. I just thought it might be part of it. The room waited. Then Daniel leaned forward. Actually, Michael already knew what was about to happen, because Daniel picked up the thread and finished the thought Michael was too afraid to complete. The room came alive. Questions, ideas, discussions. The conversation took off without him again, and Michael sat there listening to someone else carry an answer that started in his own head. The same way a person watched a train leave after deciding not to go on. By the time the meeting ended, he already knew this wasn't about Daniel anymore. It was about him. The meeting ended. Michael stayed seated, pretending to organize notes he had no intention of reading. Anything to avoid thinking about what had happened and watching Daniel get congratulated again. A few people stopped to shake Daniel's hand on the way out. Nice job, nice catch, good thinking. That might have saved us a headache. Daniel smiled, thanked them, looked almost uncomfortable with the attention because Daniel wasn't chasing recognition. It kept finding him. One by one, the room emptied until only two people remained, Michael and Mr. Tom Reynolds. The door clicked shut. Michael looked up. Tom was standing near the far end of the conference table, watching him, with a stare that made excuses feel useless before you even said them. He just watched. Tom finally broke the silence. Got a minute? Michael nodded. Tom pulled up a chair, sat down next to him. Now he was in trouble, he thought. For a few seconds, neither man spoke, just the hum of the projector. Then Tom sighed. You know, he pointed toward the door Daniel had just walked through. That wasn't his idea. Michael froze. Tom continued. It started with you. Michael looked down. Not really. Tom laughed. It was familiar. I've been doing this for 30 years, Michael. I know exactly what I watched. Michael didn't answer because he knew too. Tom leaned back. When I hired you, I told people you were going to go places. The words landed as hard as they should have because Michael remembered. He remembered that conversation. Years ago, his first week, Tom had looked him straight in the eye and said, that mind of yours is going to take you further than you think. Michael hadn't forgotten. Tom hadn't either. You know what bothers me? Michael shook his head. Tom pointed toward the conference table. You keep stopping. You get 90% of the way there. Then right before the finish line, Tom tapped the table once. You disappear. Michael felt sick because that's what exactly he felt. Not failing, disappearing. Tom's voice softened. Who convinced you being wrong was worse than saying nothing? Hearing that question, Michael's eyes shot up as if he had the answer. Then he looked defeated. Because for the first time, he wasn't thinking about Daniel or the promotion or a meeting. He was thinking about how long he'd been doing this. And the part that scared him most, he couldn't remember when it started. Sarah stood in the grocery store checkout line, half paying attention, half lost in thought. The cart wasn't even full. Some milk, bread, a few things for the house, nothing important. The cashier scanned the last item. As Sarah was reaching for her wallet, she heard a familiar voice behind her. She turned, smiled for the first time all day. Rachel. Rachel smiled back. For a second, it felt genuine. The way old friendships are supposed to feel. That survive busy schedules and missed phone calls. Sarah hadn't seen her in months. Not in person, only texts, requests, questions, favors, but still. Rachel was Rachel. At least that's what Sarah thought. How have you been? Sarah asked. Rachel shrugged. Busy. They talked for a minute, maybe two. Small talk. Then another woman approached. Someone Sarah didn't recognize. Rachel smiled, introduced them, and continued talking. Sarah stood there listening. Rachel laughed again and said, if I ever need help with anything, I call Sarah. She always says yes. It was something she never meant to be cruel about. She probably thought it was harmless. Honestly, Rachel pointed toward Sarah, if I ever need anything, she's the person I call. The woman laughed. Sarah smiled politely. Then Rachel continued. No, seriously, I don't know how she does it. She'll drop everything. She's basically my emergency contact. More laughter. The conversation drifted somewhere else. Weekend plans, work, a restaurant they wanted to try out. Sarah nodded when it seemed appropriate. Rachel just kept talking. The other woman kept laughing. Neither of them seemed to notice Sarah had stopped saying much. At the register, the cashier handed her the receipt. Sarah took it quickly. Rachel was still smiling and telling stories. Remember when my car died? She said. Sarah was there in 20 minutes. The other woman shook her head. You're lucky. Tell me about it, Rachel said. Sarah looked down at the plastic bag in her cart, then back at Rachel, waiting for something else, a different story, one that wasn't about what she'd done for someone. Nothing came. And as Rachel kept talking, Sarah felt felt a small, uncomfortable thought settle in. Quiet but impossible to ignore. She replayed the conversation in her head. Every story Rachel told, the same version of her was in it. The helper, the fixer, the person who showed up. Not the friend. Not the woman Rachel checked on when nothing was wrong. Standing there listening to Rachel laugh, Sarah realized something she hadn't wanted to admit for a long time. Maybe Rachel hadn't been holding on to their friendship the way she had. Maybe she'd only been holding on to access to her. The thought stung more than she expected. And she and as she reached for the bag, the same question surfaced again. Not with sadness, just honesty. If she stopped being useful, what would be left between them? The house was quiet, too quiet. A few hours ago, Ethan would have paid good money for a little peace. Now it felt like something pressing against him. In the kitchen, everything had been cleaned. Balloons had been taken down and thrown away. Leftover cake sat alone in the refrigerator. And somewhere upstairs, Caleb was asleep. Ethan sat at the dining room table, his laptop open, phone beside him. A yellow legal pad covered in notes. Tomorrow morning, he had an investment meeting. One he'd been working toward for months. Usually, he'd be excited, rehearsing, running numbers, thinking three steps ahead. Instead, his eyes kept drifting toward the hallway. The same hallway where a little boy had looked at him and asked one simple question. Did you see it? Ethan rubbed his face, looked back at the screen, forced himself to focus. The numbers, projections, the renovation budgets, still there. Everything made sense. He had reviewed it a dozen times already. Then his phone rang. Ethan grabbed it immediately, almost relieved. An excuse to stop thinking. Hey, Mark. The voice on the other end sounded energized, the way people do when they're talking about opportunity. You ready for tomorrow? Yeah. The answer came too quickly, too flat. Mark paused. Everything okay? Fine. Then the conversation moved forward. Market trends, funding, options, cost estimates, long-term plans. Normally, Ethan would have been driving the conversation, leading it, building momentum. Tonight, he kept losing track. Twice he asked Mark to repeat something. Once he completely missed a question. The silence that followed felt strange. Ethan. What? You sure you're all right? Ethan stared at the kitchen counter, at the unopened racing car set still sitting where he left it. The blue wrapping paper looked different now, smaller, less important. I'm fine. But even he didn't believe it. Mark laughed lightly. Well, get some sleep. We need you sharp tomorrow. The call ended. Ethan sat there staring at the dark screen. Sharp? Usually that wasn't a problem. He could walk into a room and command any conversation or deal that came his way. But tonight, His mind wasn't in tomorrow, it was upstairs, behind a closed bedroom door. And for the first time in a very long time, Ethan wasn't worried about losing a deal. He was thinking about all the moments he'd assume would still be waiting for him tomorrow. The bedtime stories, the questions, and all the small things that never seemed important until they were gone. For the first time, he understood what was really slipping through his fingers. It wasn't money or success. It was realizing he'd spent years chasing movement and noise because he didn't know how to sit still long enough to hear the silence, and that silence was where his son had been waiting for him all along.